My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. The 20th anniversary of the events of 9/11 stirs memories of both loss and trauma for those who are old enough to remember. This week on Destination Unlimited, my wife, Reverend Laurie Sue Brockway, and I share the unlikely series of events that led both of us to serve as chaplains for the Red Cross at the Family Assistance Center set up by New York City. We'll discuss our personal experiences leading up to that fateful day, how the day unfolded for us, and how we answered the call to service. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited my beloved Reverend Laurie Sue Brockway. Welcome, Laurie Sue.
Hi, honey.
Hi. So, Laurie Sue, the likelihood, as I had mentioned in the introduction, of either of us finding ourselves on a path to interfaith ministry was very, very unlikely based upon our career paths and what we were doing prior to the New Seminary of New York. So let's start by sharing with the listeners your path, what you did, and how it led you to the New Seminary.
Well, I was a journalist for 20 years, and I came to a point in my life where my dad had died, and I wanted to do offer a more spiritual service. I wanted to grow spiritually, and I wanted to change my life because I had been working as a relationship and sexuality reporter, which was really wonderful at the time. I was writing books that were kind of sexy, but Alexander, our son was 3 years old at the time, or he was young. And I told myself that I wanted to start a new life for us. And I really wanted to step onto that spiritual path.
And so consequently, your father passed away. Tell us about what happened.
My father died. He had no religion. He and my mother had been separated. I really had no idea how to bury him. I only knew that he wanted to be in the same cemetery as his parents. And so I ended up creating the eulogy and, doing part of his funeral, even though my uncle brought a Methodist minister, a family minister with him to help. I just basically did not ask him to participate. And my friends, Laura Norman and Barbara Bijou, came, and Barbara did a beautiful healing ritual with my sisters around the gravesite. And, we just sort of put this together without the minister. And after the ceremony, as we were going out to grab some food, Reverend Hector, my uncle's minister, came up to me, and I thought he was going to just tell me that I was going to hell, that this was horrible, sacrilegious. But he said to me, "Have you ever thought of becoming a minister?" And I really hadn't. But it was one of those moments in time where the right words come to you at the right time, and all of a sudden they make sense. And I began to pursue the possibility of that path.
And how did you know about the New Seminary?
Well, one of the little known secrets is that Rabbi Gelberman, who married you and I, also married me to my first husband, who is deceased. But he was part of that experience. I went to him because I had heard about this really cool seminary, and I had met him at New Age functions in New York in the 80s. And when I discovered that my ex-husband's family was more religious than I realized, they really wanted a minister to do the ceremony. And I said, well, we have to have a rabbi too. So Rabbi Gilberman was the one who stepped in to do an interfaith ceremony. And
So
so I
basically,
knew about the seminary.
so he had basically done your wedding, your first wedding, and then when this happened, when you had that calling, you decided to reach out to him, and what happened?
I called him up and I said, I'm not sure if you remember me, but you married me, blah, 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 years ago. Unfortunately, the marriage didn't work out, but I'm interested in the seminary. He said, come over. And I brought him a check for $100. I remember it was in October. And he took a deposit and he said, you know what? Don't wait until your program starts in January. Come start now. And he invited me to start coming to the seminary, and he invited me out to lunch with him.
So now let me share a little bit about my story that led me to the seminary at that time. I had been in the compressed gas and welding equipment industry for many years. And in the late 1980s, through a series of wonderful synchronicities, I started taking yoga classes with a woman who became a very dear friend of mine. She said, I love your voice. Would you start leading meditation? I started facilitating meditation. We started going on a series of retreats to a Zen monastery up in upstate New York, at which we would meditate and do yoga and have all types of wonderful spiritual gatherings. And at one of those gatherings, someone mentioned the word Reiki. Now, I had never consciously heard Reiki in this lifetime, but there was something about it that attracted me. And there were three of us, including my wonderful yoga teacher. And we decided, we had said at the time, this was October. We said, we'll look into this next year. And 2 weeks later, we were in our first Reiki class together. And Reiki became the rocket fuel, the spiritual accelerant that changed my life. And consequently, in those days, if you wanted to go into a hospital and do laying on of hands, you either had to be a licensed massage therapist or someone who was ordained in a faith where laying on of hands was considered to be a sacrament. Needless to say, having a full-time job in industry, I couldn't take 3 years off and go to massage school, but through some beautiful and amazing and wonderful synchronicities, I found out about the new seminary. And those of you who know Laurie Sue and I know that I was in a relationship with a wonderful woman by the name of Judy. She was a special education teacher, and unfortunately, she had cancer. And our gathering together, our coming together, was because she wanted to know more about meditation and energy healing and all of the things that I was doing at the time. And we met, and that relationship turned into a wonderful 3-year odyssey in which we grew and learned so much about each other. Unfortunately, she passed away at the end. She was the one who said, when I said I need to go to some type of organization to be ordained, I wasn't going to. In those days, you could send an essay and a $50 check to some place in California, and they'd send you back a certificate of ordination. That was never my way. I always had to be fully immersed in whatever changes or practices I was looking at. And she had known the new seminary and Rabbi Gelberman, who founded it. And she said, why don't you go? And we went together, actually. And when we arrived there, I recognized him as a wonderful mentor and teacher. And she also joined in our class. And we were in the class together. We started together in 1996. We graduated and were ordained together in 1997. But unfortunately, that was toward the end of her life. And in January 1998, she passed away. During the seminary ordination and graduation ceremony at the Church of St. John the Divine in Manhattan, which is a wonderful, immense cathedral, I was giving a speech on behalf of my class, and I was honoring Judy and saying what a wonderful and courageous woman she was, what a wonderful teacher she was, and what an example of someone who took all of the challenges and just moved forward with it. And sitting in the audience that day was Laurie Sue Brockway, who was coming into the school. You want to take it from there, honey?
Well, Rabbi had said, oh, come to an ordination. A class is getting ordained on November 16th. And of course, I brought Alexander with me, and he was basically having froggies, throwing up a little in the back of the church. And I heard your voice coming across the, sounding across that great cathedral. And I was just so drawn to you and what you were saying about Judy and all the beautiful, beautiful things that you said about her. And I thought to myself, where do you find a guy who talks about you like that in public? Because I actually had never heard anything like that before. And of course, now we know you're Victor the voice. I didn't really think of it being your voice also that drew me in, but I was just so drawn, and I had no way of connecting with you or really knowing anything about you. But, Rabbi said, keep going to whatever's happening with the seminary. So I went to another graduation on, I think it was actually on your birthday on January 17th, following that November.
Yeah, 1998.
Yeah. So a couple of my friends were being ordained that day. And I was sitting with my deans, Diane and Judith. And, suddenly I see them get up and start talking to this guy who I'd seen at the cathedral. And I was literally eavesdropping, and I heard you say that Judy had passed away. And I felt so sorry for your loss. I mean, it was just so incredibly touching to hear what you were saying. But at the same time, I was just very touched by the way you had shared. Rabbi had done the funeral, you were just sharing, and I was just very touched by it. And I was listening, and I just thought, wow, he just seems like a really nice person. And sure enough, I start school, and you are like sitting in front of the room of my class when I got in there, and you led a meditation. And, it's just, you kept showing up in all the places that I was. And I realized that, it took us 2 years of being around each other in all the same places. We were friends. And then 1 year on Yom Kippur, friendship caught on fire.
And just to share a little more about this, when I would see her popping up, she would always smile at me. And I would say, who is this woman who keeps smiling at me? And they said, that's Laurie Sue Brockway. She's a student in the seminary now. I said, oh, what does she do, or what did she do? And someone said she was the editor-in-chief of Playgirl magazine. And I said to myself, she's not smiling at me because I'm not Mr. January or Mr. February. I don't understand why she's smiling at me. But of course, later on, I found out that she was touched by the speech that I had made and by the message that I was sharing. And so that started our relationship. And as she mentioned, 2 years later, 1999, in 1999, our relationship ensued. And that led to the next phase. And here's the next phase. So you were prepared to work with people in the result of a disaster. Tell us how that happened.
Well, I used to be a crime reporter in my early days of reporting. It was one of my first jobs on the Brooklyn paper. And I always loved, at the time, I liked reporting on cops and the work they did. And I had met somebody through Single Living who was an expert author, and he was working for the FBI as a consultant. And when I told him that I was leaving the magazine and becoming a minister, he said, you should really take the CISM, Critical Incident Stress Management Program. They give it like twice a year or something like that. He was saying, most of the people who work for armed forces and police officers, FBI agents, they don't like to talk to therapists, but they'll talk to a clergy person if they need help. And the whole thing with critical incident stress management was, it was a training to help the first responders. That was basically, you go and sit in a room for 4 days and watch pictures and hear stories of the worst things that have ever happened on earth. And we're going back over 20 years because there's so many worse things that have happened since then. But the worst thing that had happened at that point was Oklahoma City. So just a month or so after graduating from seminary, I took this training, And I was completely traumatized. I was sitting in it for days. I got, certified in part 1, part 2. I had all the credentials, but I was traumatized by it. And I thought, why did I do this? I don't want to do this work. I don't want to, I don't want to go into disasters. I just was really, had no idea why I was led to go to Alabama and do this training. And then when things happened on 9/11,
You knew why you
I
had that
realized
training.
why I had those credentials, because I brought them with me when I went to the armory when I realized,
And
that the city was in chaos and they needed help.
and
And
we're going to touch upon that in the next segment, but I want to share what happened between my graduation and ordination and 9/11, in addition to the fact that our relationship ensued. I actually had no plans of doing anything other than being able to go into hospitals and do laying on of hands. But because of the ordination and because of the spiritual growth of my path, I started visiting people in hospitals. I started working with people who were basically dying in hospitals because I had the experience from my former partner, Judy. And without formally being trained as a hospital chaplain, I got actual practical training in chaplaincy, going to bedsides, working with families, helping people who were about to transition and cross over. And I had many opportunities as a volunteer to do this in the time between the graduation and ordination from the new seminary and the events that transpired on 9/11. So you had the formal training. I had the informal volunteer training of doing this work with people in hospitals, of doing coaching and counseling. And one of the things that I learned in that process was the greatest gift that we may offer, not only as ministers, but just as human beings to one another, is the gift of sacred listening, of truly listening to what someone has to say without interruption, without interjecting our opinion, and really hearing them, and hearing them in a way that perhaps we had never heard someone respond to us or share with us before. And in giving that gift of sacred listening and hearing every word that they shared and feeling what they were sharing, sometimes when appropriate, we were given the words through Spirit to give back to them that may be helpful. But the majority of the time, it was our presence, it was the energy in that sacred space that we created, and it was the gift of truly listening that was the healing aspect of what we did. Did you want to expand on that?
I just want to make one note here. I was not trained by the FBI. I was trained by the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. It's just that the people who were trained, many of them were clergy people, were people who were chaplains for the FBI or police chaplains or fire chaplains or military chaplains. There are other people as well. First responders also were trained to help one another. That was a huge part of it. But it wasn't an actual FBI training.
I see. Who was the organization that sponsored that training?
International Critical Incident Stress Foundation.
I see. And they also afforded that training. They also afforded that training to people who were first responders, correct?
Exactly. The way they focus on the training is to help first responders and chaplains help each other to debrief people after a tragedy. Things have gotten so crazy and out of hand with the crises in our world that cumulative stress that first responders are dealing with has gotten just really overwhelming. And the idea of this organization was to help people acknowledge the trauma they've been through, chill out a little, and feel supported, and support them in a little self-nurturing. But as you know, a lot of people who are in that role are, they don't like to stop. They just go and they do their job and they don't even think about it.
And what ensued after that, Laurie Sue had her path, I had my path. Neither of us could ever imagine what was going to happen that fateful day in 2001. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little break right now. And after the break, we're going to tell the story of what happened with both of us on 9/11. My guest is my beloved wife, Reverend Laurie Sue Brockway. And we'll be back after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting. A teenager. Learning the lingo.
Today I'm going to help parents translate teen slang. Now, when a teen says something is on fleek, it's exactly like saying, that's rad. It simply means that something is awesome or cool. Another one is totes. It's exactly like saying, totally, just shorter. As in, I totes love going to the mall with Becca. Another word you might hear is jelly. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will think you're, rad, just the same. To learn more, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from New Thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest is my beloved, my wife, Reverend Laurie Sue Brockway, and we're talking about the events that happened around 9/11 that led us to service with the Red Cross, an unexpected path that neither of us ever anticipated. So we were sharing in the first segment how both of us had our respective paths, how it led to the new seminary of New York, our ordination and graduation from the new seminary as interfaith ministers, and the unlikely paths that brought us to those points. So the morning of 9/11, I was out in Billings, Montana, attending a users group for a company called Computers Unlimited. They provided the software that was used in my industry, the welding and compressed gas industry. And consequently, I was out there attending a group meeting, a users group meeting, where we shared new information about new software, new developments. We networked and shared our experiences to help one another. I was a 2-hour difference between Billings, Montana and New York. I was preparing for the day's conference, had the television on, watching CNN. I called Laurie Sue and wished her a good morning, and we're talking together on the phone, and then all of a sudden, the first plane hit. Do you recall our conversation at that point?
I do, because while we were talking, you had called in to check in like you did every morning. Remember, we didn't live together at the time.
Right.
And while we were on the phone, the first plane hit. We had the Today Show on. I had it on, or had something on the TV, and you had something on the TV, and we just watched it in horror. And then, you stayed on the phone with me, and another plane hit.
The second plane hit.
And I said, I have to go because I have to figure out how to get Alex. And I sent out an email asking for people to pray for New York. I just sat down at my AOL account and sent it to everybody on my list. And I happened to get an email back from my friend Marianne Raposo, and she told me she was going to go get her girls out of school. And I said, I'm just in a panic right now because I don't know if I'll be able to get out of the city to get Alex.
Explain where you lived, exactly where you lived.
I lived on 44th Street, right up the block from the UN, and Alex was in school in Mineola, and it was about an hour away on a good day with traffic. And
how old was Alex at the time?
He was young. He was like 10.
He was 10. Right.
Let's see. Alex it was 2001. So he was 10.
Right.
So Marianne said, I'll pick him up. And I was like, oh my God, thank you. And I ran outside and I saw hordes of people walking up 2nd Avenue toward the 59th Street Bridge. And my neighbor, RJ, came up to me on his bicycle and he said, oh my God, Laurie Sue, I went down there. It is horrible. The building fell down. And, I went back to the television. First I had to call the school and ask them to pack up all of Alexander's. Remember, he used to drink a special Alimentum formula. I had to ask the school to pack up all his special medical supplies, his Alimentum. And I said, you have to allow my friend to take him. I know that she's not on the list, but I will, vouch when she comes, just call me. So Marianne got Alex and she got her kids, and all the kids were safely in her house, which was someplace in Long Island. And then I was just trying to figure out what was going on because it was pure chaos. And even though people were able to walk over the 59th Street Bridge, I was thinking of doing it myself. I went into the house to try to pack a few things. I thought if I could get over the bridge to my mother's house in Queens and Flushing, if I could somehow get to my mother's house, then I'd be closer to Alex's school and I could go, get him from Marianne. But they shut everything down. They didn't let traffic move. They didn't let people walk across the bridge after a certain time. And it was just a horrible, horrible, horrible day in New York. I went back and I watched everything on television. You and I spoke. I know you were, really worried about us. Of course, we were right up the block from the UN, which immediately goes into lockdown. Anytime there is anything going on in the city, it took them a while, but they put the block into lockdown. And I believe that it was the same week as the start of the General Assembly, which always would happen at the UN, and that block would be locked down anyway. So it's just like so much going on. There were diplomats in town. I don't even remember what happened. I just was trying to figure out if I could get out of the city to get my son. I had to check in on my mother. She was fine. And my nephew was able to get over to my mother's house. She was upset, but she was okay. She was worried about me being in the city. And, it was just trying to figure out what was happening. And at the same time, my instinct also was I ran to the supermarket to just get some, me, I never kept any food in the house. I just went and got some water and just, a little bit of food in case the world ended. And then I did try to get out of the city at nighttime, and there were just nothing was allowed to move. Everything was stopped.
Now, just to explain to our listeners, Alexander, our son, was born with certain conditions. He's missing one of his legs, and he's an amazing young man. Now he's going to be 30. He gets around on 2 crutches and a rollerblade, and he actually goes through the entire city that way. He's an amazing young man. But he was going to a school out in Long Island called the Henry Biscardi School for Abilities, where kids who were born with various issues would attend together, and they'd learn how to overcome their issues and learn life skills. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful school. So her friend, Marianne, picked up Alexander from the school, brought him back to her house. Laurie Sue was doing what she was doing. In the meantime, I'm out in Montana trying to figure out how I can get back to New York. And all of the planes obviously were grounded. The scheduling of the airlines looked like nothing would happen until that Friday, and this was a Tuesday. I was the chairman of the users group, this conference that we were attending out in Billings, Montana, and I also had the responsibility. They normally would have a party that night, a gathering of everyone and a party and various types of festivities, and the woman who was in charge of that came to me in tears and said, "What should we do?" And I said, the best thing to do would be to have the dinner. We'll have the dinner in this huge dining area, and we'll all be together. And I will open it up with a prayer and ask everyone to join me in a prayer and just support each other, give each other the comfort of being together as a family and to sustain each other through this event with everything that was going on. And of course, many people wanted to get back to their homes immediately. And that was almost impossible to do. There were some people who actually rented cars and minivans to try and commute to different parts of the country. But being from New York, my only option would have been to take a plane, and the earliest plane leaving was going to be on Friday. So, Laurie, between that time of that Tuesday, between the events of 9/11 and that Friday when I returned, tell our listeners what happened.
Well, the next day, they opened up the Long Island Railroad, and the number 7 train was running, and some of the trains were running, not everything. And I took the number. I remember I went through the only path that I could take to get to the Long Island Railroad, which was to change at one of the stops on the 7 line, which is above ground. And my heart broke in 2 as I saw the smoking towers in the distance. You could smell it. It was just heart-wrenching. I had to go pick up Alex. Marianne had taken care of him. And, he did have daily medical needs. So she literally had a neighbor come over who was a doctor to help take care of him. And then, her son was a pop star. So Alex got to sleep in the bed next to him. So he was very happy. He wasn't, aware of what was going on. He was with all her kids and he was happy. But I went to Marianne's house, and I got there through various means, and I sat with her and her husband at the time, and he was an architect, and, everybody had various theories about what had happened to the buildings. And of course, we were all trying to figure out, what happened and who was involved and, who was hurt. We just didn't know. We just didn't know exactly what had happened, other than the 2 planes that hit the building and the Pentagon, and one went down in
Hanksville, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and obviously everybody on that plane was a hero. I mean, it was just, we just didn't know what was going on, and we felt helpless. I felt helpless because I was a minister and I felt like I should be doing something. And, so basically I got Alexander home. We basically stayed in Manhattan. It was like a ghost town those first couple of days. Everything was closed. Nobody knew what was happening. We didn't know if we were going to get hit with another terrorist attack. And, you were very worried about us. You were in Montana. I missed you terribly, but there was nothing we could do. The planes weren't flying. So the world had kind of stopped. And somehow, I think I must have left Alex with my neighbor. I heard, I went to a candlelight vigil at the Armory. I heard that people were gathering on 26th Street at the Armory there. And I realized that, maybe I could volunteer. So I brought my paperwork from critical incident stress management. And I went to this table. They just had like a piece of paper with a note on it. It said chaplains. Then another note on the next table was mental health. So I went to the chaplain table and I showed them the paperwork, and they gave me just a piece of white paper that you would Xerox something with, or typing paper. They wrote chaplain on it and gave me a safety pin to pin on my chest. And then I went outside and I started looking at the wall, and it was filled with pictures of missing people, hundreds and hundreds of pictures that people had left there with notes saying, call his wife, call his daughter, just contact information missing from 9/11. And there were people out there talking to the media. And of course, I had seen some of this on television, watching it excessively before I went down there, that the reporters from CNN and other stations were like on the edge of tears because these people were coming up to them and saying, here's my husband, here's my wife, here's my son, here's my daughter, here's my grandmother, here's the person who didn't come home on 9/11. And they were begging for help. And it had broken my heart. And when I got down there and saw all those pictures, I thought, oh my God, this is like unbelievable what's happened to our city, what's happened to all these loved ones who went to work in the morning and never came back. And I just remember that morning because it was a beautiful, beautiful fall day with a bright blue sky. And it was just an unbelievable sequence of events that happened. So at any rate, it was the Red Cross that was signing people up to help. And I don't even think they realized in the beginning the magnitude of this tragedy. And, basically they realized they needed all hands on deck. And there were a lot of people who stepped forward. There were people from our seminary too that I saw there. And I really didn't know what it would take to be a chaplain, but, they gave us training. And, they sent us for trainings, and they had debriefings every night. And
so what had happened was I was still out in Montana. Laurie Sue started the chaplaincy work. As I had mentioned, I got the first plane out of Montana that Friday. It was Montana, Billings to Denver, and then Denver into Newark because the New York airports were closed. Newark was open. And I remember flying in and looking out of the window of the plane and seeing this pillar of smoke rising on Lower Manhattan and knowing what that was. The plane landed. I was able to get a cab from Newark Airport to Laurie's apartment. We were reunited. I remember that night holding each other. I think we did a little crying. The next morning, I went to my office where I worked in the welding equipment and compressed gas company, and we were preparing to send all types of gas, oxygen, fuel to cut the broken and twisted steel, safety supplies for the responders and the fire people and the police, masks, respirators, everything you can think of, truckload after truckload. Many of the manufacturers that we sold their products gave us trailer loads of free goods to distribute down to ground zero in support of the wonderful people who were working down there, hope against hope to find survivors. In any event, and that afternoon, I went back to Laurie Sue that Saturday afternoon, and the city had opened up this beautiful, beautiful family assistance center on the west side of Manhattan, on one of the piers. To his credit, Mayor Giuliani, who was mayor at the time, had this thing set up in a matter of a couple of days. with every type of assistance that family members could need. And Laurie said, you can come with me to the Red Cross and sign up as a chaplain. And even though I didn't have that document, they were looking for help. And I took the class. We both were given our badges. And then the work began. And we're going to conclude what happened in the next segment. My guest is my beloved, my wife, Reverend Laurie Sue Brockway. We'll be back after more of these. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Back on Destination Unlimited, with me tonight is my beloved, my wife, Reverend Laurie Sue Brockway. And we're talking about the unlikely chain of events that led us both to be chaplains for the Red Cross after 9/11. So we were taking that training together with the Red Cross. They called it the Spiritual Care Team, and they changed the name because spiritual care, if you shorten it, sounds like scare. And quite frankly, I think all of us were scared. But we knew that we had a calling and a service to do. And I would do my day job during the day. Like I said, we were shipping supplies to the wonderful workers who were down at Ground Zero trying to rescue people and find out what was going on within the horrible rubble and the accumulation of twisted steel and concrete. And by nights, we were taking shifts with the Red Cross at the Family Assistance Center on the west side of Manhattan. Laurie Sue, please tell our listeners what happened during one of those shifts.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that being a chaplain for the Red Cross is not going in there and being a minister and trying to help people or offer them religion. It is, or even spirituality. It is about standing around and seeing if people start talking to you, just being there. And what happened over those months that we worked at that family center was there was a huge wall, way bigger than the first one I'd seen at the Armory and others around town, a huge wall, because this family center was for the actual families. It was for the people who were there that day, who were dealing with trauma and insurance and all sorts of issues. And it was for the families. And the families were bringing samples of DNA. They were bringing hairbrushes and toothbrushes and underwear and pillowcases and anything that might have the DNA of their loved one, as, the mission turned from recovery to, from rescue to recovery. And on the wall were hundreds and hundreds of pictures of missing loved ones and beautiful shrines and remembrances and pictures and teddy bears. It was lined with teddy bears from the children of Oklahoma. I mean, it was just this wall of love and pain because those people didn't come back. And the issue of them not coming back didn't happen immediately. It was weeks and weeks of hope and trying to figure out what happened, wishing their relative would come in the door. It was just a very difficult situation. And we were there, like so many other people, to just be present. And a lot of times, I think you remember, honey, you would just walk down the little corridor near the wall, and people would be standing there looking at the picture of their loved one, and they would just collapse. They'd collapse in our arms.
And then we would take them into private rooms and give them that sacred space to listen to everything they wanted to share and just comfort them. It was about comforting.
And we heard a lot of stories, people, from first responders, family members. A lot of people did share things. And of course, we don't share any of them. And we've never even talked about this publicly. And I think we're just talking about it today because it's 20 years and we just want to honor those people and the first responders and honor our own experience. But on one of our shifts, we had been talking to somebody who had lost a cousin in, I think it was the North Tower windows of the world. Mm-hmm. And she happened to tell us a story of some of what she heard went on up there. She was traumatized, and she was just sharing a call she got from her cousin. And a few minutes later, as we walked into the cafeteria, I noticed this family sitting there. And I said to you, oh my God, I think these are my in-laws, my former in-laws. And I saw my former mother-in-law, and I saw my former brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws, and they were all at that table. And the only one who wasn't there was my ex-husband. And I walked over to them, and my former mother-in-law she called to me, and she, hugged me, and she said, Laurie, we found him and we buried him yesterday, and I wanted to invite you to the funeral. She was glad to see me. And, obviously he was an ex-husband, and that means that we had a difficult past, but I really, I had been close to his family, and he was somebody that I loved once. And it was a very difficult experience to be there as a chaplain. And all those weeks, it was 5 weeks into it, all those weeks I was walking along that corridor, there was no photo of him. They never put a photo of him up there. So I had no way of knowing anyway. I do believe that kind of is the night that you and I got engaged, because I didn't want to introduce you to them as my boyfriend. And I said, this is my fiance. I just wanted them to know that I was okay. And you and I sat with them, and we actually, did what we could to help them. They had some questions, but really we sat and we grieved together. And I felt of all the miraculous, weird synchronicities in the world. I mean, to not ever see his picture on that wall, and to be there the night that we had our shift, the night that his family was there, and to be able to hear from them that very terrible news, and to sit with them and grieve. I felt like that was his parting gift to me in some way. I stayed on the shift for as long as I could. But eventually, as the weeks progressed, I felt so much grief, and it touched my personal life in such a deep way that I felt like I had done all I could. And so I was no longer serving at the family center. I think you actually continued on a little longer than I did.
There's an old expression, baptism by fire. And for us as chaplains, that's what this event was. It was baptism by fire. It actually brought us to a deeper understanding of why we received our respective callings. Because the mission that we thought we were on, and me in my terms, was to be able to help people to heal in hospitals by laying on of hands. In Laurie's point of view was about bringing people together in marriage and doing wonderful things in that way. But neither of us knew that this would be one of the ultimate outcomes of our ordination and graduation, and that truly it was a baptism by fire, but it gave us a deeper understanding of this calling and how to be of service to others. And even though officially we weren't involved in doing this after the 9/11 incident was over, we've been doing this our entire relationship.
Well, actually, I found some certificates. They were still, they actually still had us on the roster, and we were still training with them for future disasters.
Yes.
For quite some time. There was the Circle of Trauma training and Life Cycle Disaster Conference. There's just a lot of stuff that we continued to participate in, but it was just, to be very honest, I really began to feel the trauma of it all, not just my personal experience, but just professionally. It was so traumatic. And we ended up moving in together after that, and it changed our life. And I believe that all the training we got from the Red Cross and all the generosity of spirit of people who shared their very difficult stories with us, the people who were willing to share with us what had happened, that really has such an impact. I mean, a huge impact. And people who were at that family center had devastating loss, irreplaceable loss, traumatized for generations to come. So whatever small bit of pain I experienced in my own journey there was just a tiny little blip. It was the pain of my ex-husband's family that was significant. Their loss was terrible. And, you never get over something like that. It's taken me 20 years, but I finally went back to the site. I have been watching the calling of the names and the ceremonies every year, but I finally went to the site of the memorial and to pay my respects and to say a proper goodbye to him, and to just say I'm sorry that I couldn't get there sooner. But I really recommend it to people. It is a beautiful memorial, and everybody who was lost and touched by what happened on the towers and in our world that day, and even the terrorism act of 1993. Everybody is honored, and they're honored in such a way that they're grouped together with the people that they died with, or the people who meant something to them who died that day. And it is a profound experience to be at those two memorial, beautiful waterfalls that just sink into the earth. And they're both at the footprint of each tower. And I hope that everybody gets to pay their respects there someday.
And the irony of this for me personally was that after serving as a chaplain there, going back to my day job, in addition to doing ministerial work, which is not related to 9/11, not related to the Family Assistance Center, but I was involved in the buildings going back up again, the new One World Trade Center, or One World. I was involved in helping customers building that. So the pattern came full circle, and these synchronicities that happened, that unfolded in both of our lives and collectively, is just an example of how when you answer a call, no matter how you think that call should be answered, the divine will guide you through that call. And I just like to close tonight with a prayer that we never forget the lessons of 9/11. We never forget the loving support that we gave each other. We didn't see each other as political parties. We didn't see each other as different colors. We didn't see each other as different cultures or religions. We saw each other as brothers and sisters. And my prayer is that that energy returns to our world and leads us to a better life. Laurie Sue, anything to add?
That's beautiful, honey. And I just really want to send my love and condolences to all those who lost so much that day, who lost the people so dear to them, and all that our world lost that day. And to send my love to everybody who is in this cycle of trauma right now. It seems so overwhelming, and it seems like it's never ending. We thought that 9/11 was the worst thing that could ever possibly happen. And it sadly became one of the worst things that could ever happen. And more has followed. And I just pray for our world and all those who are going through personal loss, because there are so many people in the cycle of trauma right now. So may God lift them up and may they find peace. So it is.
Amen. Thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited on this 20th anniversary of 9/11. I'm Victor the Voice Fuhrman. Have a good night.